Hello, my name is William Vargas, and this is my initial reaction to Yellow, Neither Black Nor White. When you first start reading it, it starts bringing you into Do the Right Thing by Spike Lee, which is a movie that I just recently watched. And I thought that one of the scenes that was the most powerful was when the Asian American grocery store owner started to kind of plea with the people that were riding just to try to get on an even level with them. Um, when before earlier in the film, he was basically discriminating against them and treated them differently. And the people of the neighborhood, predominantly black, they saw that, and in return, they reciprocated basically the same hatred that he was giving, and the African Americans that lived in the neighborhood didn't really appreciate that the only successful businesses that were in their community were those that were run by non-blacks. Um, so that was just one of the first things that caught my eye first going into this reading. Another thing that really got me thinking was the fact that when we do talk about different, not really different, but when we talk about issues that come with race and discrimination, it is only black and white. We talk about how the white culture basically, or the white society, discriminates and goes against the African American or black society, but we don't really talk about everyone else that's kind of involved in there, including Asian Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, and anyone else. And I personally feel that whenever talking about anything that has to deal with race, I was just in a class for white privilege, power and privilege class with Damian Evans, well, or Professor Damian Evans, and he um, wanted to gear the class mostly towards how uh, white people have a privilege over everyone else. But whenever we had an open discussion, it was always white versus black. And personally, I felt that every time we had one of these discussions that I had to stick up for my culture and I had to find a way to incorporate Latino Americans and the oppression that we faced in these discussions. And I can only imagine that if there were someone that was Asian American that stood up in that class, that we would be able to have conversations like this about the oppression of Asian Americans from society, which brings us to how Asian Americans have been classified. Um, they, it seems like they weren't good enough for the white people to consider them white, so they just put them aside, and they call them constructive blacks, which is something that I am writing about in my discussion post. When you look up the definition for constructive, the exact definition actually is serving a useful purpose and tending to build up, which makes you think, why was there constructive blacks and then just those that were categorized as black? And that makes me think that black wasn't a color to people, it was a status. Um, a status of being lower than those that are white. And I feel that white people saw blacks, like actual African Americans, and classified them as only black because they saw them as people that were just there and didn't really do anything, but they saw, I guess, Asian Americans and Latino Americans as constructive blacks because they contributed to the society. Honestly, it's really touchy and you can't really point out exactly why. Um, but it's as if, like I said before, it's they weren't good enough to be white, but they weren't bad enough to be African American. So that's why they were put into different categories. But that's just my initial reaction to this article. I actually really enjoyed reading it because I was able to connect a lot of parallels with the underrepresentation of Asian Americans with the underrepresentation of Latino Americans. We constantly have to fight to be heard. Um, it's kind of annoying, I guess you could say sometimes, that issues like this are only black and white. And we push aside all the other minority groups for some reason. I'm not saying that African Americans don't deserve to be represented because we've all been oppressed, but I'm saying that they shouldn't be the only ones that are being represented because at the end of the day, we're all facing the same struggle. Thank you.